Thank you. Senator Isakson.
Thank you, Chairman Corker, and Senator Cardin, thank you for your opening statements, and thank you for the way in which you've handled the beginning of this debate that we'll have over the next 56 remaining days. I'm going to be pretty brief because everything's been said, just everybody hadn't said it yet, so I'm familiar with Senate hearings when they enter their 4th hour. But I do want to make a couple of things crystal clear on behalf of my constituents, and I speak for myself as well. Secretary Kerry, you said that this has unprecedented transparency from a standpoint of inspections and holding Iran accountable. Is that correct?
With the exception of the Iraq War, yes.
Do you recall the debate on the New START treaty?
Somewhat.
We were involved in that pretty heavily when you were chairman of the committee.
That was missiles, and there's a distinction between missiles and a nuclear program. But I know we had shorter period for an access to a missile. That's a different deal.
But what got the 2/3 majority that ratified the New START treaty in the Senate was satisfaction to the Senate that the inspection regimen was quick, decisive, and the United States had access to look and verify what the Russians had told us. Is that not correct?
Correct. On a missile. That's correct.
But it was a verification of an agreement in the treaty.
I understand.
This particular agreement, as I understand it, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the IAEA is the inspector.
Principal inspector. We are obviously sleuthing, and all of our intelligence communities around the world would be following it, but they're the principal and identified inspector.
And we pay 25% of the cost of the IAEA, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And the treaty specifically says none of the inspectors can be Americans. Is that correct?
In this particular thing, yes, that's correct.
Those 2 points that I've raised are why people raise questions in terms of the inspections and whether they are unprecedented in their transparency. And I'll just leave that for you to respond to later, now or later, but I think you're really going to have to deal with it deeper than you have today.
Well, I'm happy to explain. There are a lot of reasons, not the least of which we don't have diplomatic relations with Iran, which is one of the principal reasons that we can't proceed to have inspectors and so forth. The START treaty had specific locations identified in it, pre-located. This inspection is for things that we can't pre-locate. These are for what we might suspect at some point in time, or what we might have some evidence of at a point in time. And so what the START inspections are analogous to is an IAEA visit to a declared location. We have that. We have the same thing. Declared location in START, declared location here. What's unprecedented here, Senator, which we negotiated, and I was, pleased we got it, is this ability for us to be able to close out the IAEA process. The reason we are all here today is that the IAEA could never get it finished. They would fight. They'd go back and forth. The years went by. Nothing closed it out. We have an ability, through the Joint Commission here, to vote, go to the UN Security Council, and mandate that they give us access. And if they haven't given us the access, they are in material breach, and we get snapback of the sanctions. So there's an automaticity to this that doesn't exist in other agreements.
Okay. In 1 second, Secretary Moniz, I want to get to one other question, then we'll elaborate. Thank you for the answer. The second thing that concerns a lot of people, and I think Senator Menendez brought it up a minute ago or in his earlier statement, was the negotiation of the 5-year when the UN embargo on conventional arms goes away.
Right.
It appears to me that that appeared late in the negotiations and was not something that was on the table originally or even thought to be talked about, because this was a nuclear deal. Why and when did that embargo, the expiration of that embargo, get into the deal?
The discussions of the embargo actually began on almost day one of the negotiations.
Well, then,
and they went on for 2 years, 2.5 years.
Why, in a hearing based on nuclear weapons and prohibiting the Iranians getting a nuclear weapon, would we waive a sanction at some point in time in the future on exporting conventional arms? Why would that be a part of the agreement to start with?
Well, let me explain to you. It's a good question, and let me answer it. It was slid into the UN resolution at the last minute. Frankly,
the arms embargo provision.
The arms embargo and the missile. The arms embargo specifically was the last minute. Yeah. Then UN
into the nuclear resolution,
right? Then UN Permanent Representative Susan Rice helped write that, or wrote a good part of it, and she put it in. And in fact, the Iranians bitterly objected to it, felt it was being rammed at them in the context of a nuclear agreement, and it had no business being part of a nuclear agreement. It's conventional arms, and they thought they had every right in the world to do it. They have fundamentally ignored it for all these years, but they made it clear from the get-go that one of the primary red lines was they had to get all those sanctions lifted. We said, no, we're not going to lift them. We're not going to do this when your behavior, look at what you're doing in Yemen, look at what you're doing with Hezbollah. We're not going to lift it. The problem is, Senator, we had 3 countries out of 7 that were ready to lift it altogether on day 1, and 4 countries that said, no, we need to keep it. So the compromise ultimately was recognizing that we had many different ways of coming at the enforcement of activities on missiles and arms, with specific resolutions for no arms to the Houthi, no arms to the Shia in Iraq, no arms to Hezbollah, no arms to Libya, no arms to North Africa, to North Korea. All these are existing resolutions that we have and can enforce. So we didn't think we were losing anything. In fact, we won a victory to get the 5 and the 8 to continue them in the context of a nuclear resolution where they believed they didn't belong in the first place.
My time is almost up, so I'm going to interrupt, and I apologize for doing
No, that's
so.
fine.
But correct me on one thing. You said at the beginning it was on the table from almost the beginning?
Well, the point, no, what was,
No, let me finish.
their
Well, I heard-
demand was on the table from the beginning.
Okay.
Their demand, and we said no from the beginning.
And then you s-
frankly,
and then
we
you
knew
s-
this was going to come down to be probably the last issue.
And then you said, quite frankly, it was slid in at the end.
At the UN by Susan Rice, when she first wrote Resolution 1929, the arms embargo came into that resolution at the very last minute.
Well, my only point, and I'm sorry I'm cutting you off, but I don't want to be respectful of the time. The inspection and the transparency of those inspections, and some satisfaction we didn't give away the store on conventional arms to put Israel or some of the other Middle Eastern countries in jeopardy, is a serious question that needs to be responded to. Secretary Moniz, you wanted to say something.
I was going to add a small footnote to the issue of the countries without diplomatic relations not being part of the inspection team, which obviously includes us. I just want to point out that, again, that for decades now, all the inspectors are trained, have training here in the United States. We're very confident in a very, very broad set of very competent people. In addition, and I could get you the exact number, but right now I think we have about a dozen Americans in the safeguards effort at IAEA, and obviously they play a very critical role.
I would love it if you would get me that information specifically.
And Senator, I'll get you a list of all the mechanisms we have to prevent the arms from flowing that are a threat to Israel and the region.
Those are critical questions to me, and I think the American people. Thank you for your service to the country.